trees do not stand alone. Beneath this ground, their roots run intertwining, interconnected, spread wide. Above ground, they appear separate. Below, a different truth. A community woven together to survive, to thrive. We too have a collective destiny. We work, sweat, question, create, dream, do together. We cannot reach these heights alone. We come together. We learn from each other. We find the places where our visions align and reinforce them. We find the gaps between us and we fill them. We weave solutions from the diversity of our perspectives, and together we rise. At these new heights, so will come new questions. Will what we do be enough? Enough to truly change all that needs changing? How would we even know? How can we do better to get there together? How will our world change as we try? And so, like these trees, we intertwine to grow. We weave ideas together. We work to discover each other. We work to create a community. We gather and we rise.
And that is New Prophet. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in welcoming my panel to the stage to discuss Reimaging Learning?
Thank you.
Our panel moderator today is Vanessa Kirsch, founder and CEO of New Prophet. Forbes has dubbed her one of 15 innovators who will change the world. Jeff Walker, at my far left, is board chair of New Prophet and author of the Generosity Network. Previously, he was vice chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase, founded and led their venture capital and private equity business for 25 years. He served on numerous corporate, university, and nonprofit boards, including the board of my alma mater, the University of Virginia, for which we are all grateful, Jeff. Thank you. And he is currently vice chairman of the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy's Office for Health, Finance, and Malaria. Dr. Pamela Cantor is president and CEO of Turnaround for Children, a nonprofit that is connecting the dots between science, adversity, and school performance. Dr. Cantor founded Turnaround in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks to address the impact of trauma on New York City public school students. She was named an Ashoka Fellow in 2013 and awarded the Purpose Prize for Intergenerational Impact in 2014. Shruti Sarah leads New Prophet's Reimagine Learning Focused Fund. It brings together a collaborative of social entrepreneurs, fundraisers, researchers, and policy influencers, and members of the creative and entertainment community, trying to fundamentally reimagine the future of learning in America. Jim Balfans has served as president of City Year since 2010. In partnership with Johns Hopkins Talent Development and Communities in Schools, Balfans also played a leadership role in the development of Diplomas Now, which has awarded a $36 million Investing in Innovation Award. It was awarded that, by the Department of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, let's address Reimagining Learning. Please,
Great.
Vanessa.
Well, thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. And we don't know much about this audience, so we wanted to hear a little bit and learn about you all before we started into our panel. And I was wondering if I was going to ask you a few questions, and we just wanted to get a read on who's associated to these different issues. So we wanted to start with, how many of you have been educators or work in the education space now? Please raise your hand. Awesome.
Wow.
Great. Good. Along those lines, how many of you have, just after the panel we came off of, how many of you work in health or medicine? Great. And in the area of sort of business, how many of you have been in some way, shape, or form an investor, part of venture capital, private equity, investing in great ideas and people? Okay, great. And for the purposes of this, just to point out that everybody is an educator, we wanted to also ask, how many of you have children? How many of you have grandchildren? How many have great-grandchildren? We have a new great-grandchild here over. So the point here being that we're all educators and we're all brain builders. And so today we're going to talk about Reimagine Learning, and whether you're in education or not, or supporting education, it's something we all need to think about and think new and think differently about. So today's conversation is about reimagining learning, but we also want to tell you a little bit about our approach to our education effort, which is a little different than what we've seen in philanthropy for a long time. So I want to start by telling you a little story about New Profit. Many years ago, I took a year and I traveled around the world, and in that year, I interviewed 350 citizens, social entrepreneurs, business leaders. It was an amazing ticket to just learn about people around the world. But the thing that I ended up coming back with is learning the most about America from being away from America. And the two things I came back to America with was a sense of how proud I was of the entrepreneurial system that existed in our country. If you were an entrepreneur and you wanted in the for-profit sector to start a business, like many of the ones we heard earlier, like Pixar in the 4-car garage, or Apple, who started in a garage, you could start an idea in a garage, and there is a whole system that takes entrepreneurs through the journey of getting to scale, building a company. So that's something uniquely American and wonderful about our country. Similarly, on the other side, we have an amazing culture of philanthropy like no other country. A culture of not only giving resources but also volunteering and being involved. Our nonprofit sector is robust. As a matter of fact, 115 nonprofits start a day, and I'm sure you feel like most of them call you. So it is a very lucky thing in America that we have an entrepreneurial system and a philanthropic system. The challenge when I came back to America was I didn't think we'd done a good enough job of knitting together our entrepreneurial system with our philanthropic sector. And what I meant by that is that in philanthropy, we didn't have the equivalent of venture capital. We didn't go out and find great ideas that were heroic leaders who didn't know how to run businesses and back them to scale. And so I started New Profit, which is a venture capital fund, but for the nonprofit sector, designed to help great nonprofit leaders like these people here get their ideas to real scale, to have real change and sustain that change. And that means an incredible partnership where we have to work with them for years on their business plans, on their business models, on providing the revenue. So we function just like a venture capital firm. But over the last 15 years, we learned a lot. And not everything went perfectly. We loved betting on great social entrepreneurs and bet on Wendy Kopp when she was starting Teach for America and the folks who run KIP. And we bet on a lot of great social entrepreneurs that have gotten to national scale. But at the same time, we came to realize that change, the kind of change we need in this country, is not going to happen with point solutions. Or to use a music analogy that Jeff has taught me, they're not soloists. We can't just bet on a soloist. We have to start betting on ensembles, on how we bring a set of organizations, a whole ecosystem together to align their actions, because the problems are so great that it's not going to be one answer and one silver bullet. And so New Profit has shifted our strategy of investing philanthropically, and we're betting on ensembles. And so today, we're going to give you a window into an ensemble that we're betting on. This is our Reimagine Learning ensemble. This is 4 people from a group of about 100 that are working together to try to reimagine learning. And they're going to tell you a story of what it's like not to be an individual organization funded by a philanthropist, but to be a collective. And you saw a Redwoods video. It was really about how do we intertwine those roots so that we all are better together. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Shruti, who runs the Reimagine Learning Collective, and she's going to tell us about what was the objective, what was the grand vision, and what are they aiming at, and what are the problems that we're facing. And I can tell you that there won't be a lot of facilitation on my part, because this ensemble works so well together, I probably won't even get a word in edgewise. But I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vanessa. So several years ago, there were many of us sitting around a room, much smaller group than this, and we started to have a conversation about what is going on in education in this country. So the group of us collectively represented hundreds and thousands of hours of work towards improving education, public education in this country. And yet, we weren't getting far enough. We weren't achieving that promise and that dream that we had all started this work with. So we started to ask ourselves, why is that? And what do we need to be doing differently? And when we started to look into this, we found that there was a report that came out from Johns Hopkins University. It's called the Grad Nation Report. And in there, they talk about how we could get to a stunning 90% high school graduation rate with all of these students college and career ready. And it only takes about 310,000 additional students every year to get there. 310,000 students isn't that much. Collectively, the portfolio of New Profit represents a heck of a lot more than that. But the devil's in the details. What does it actually look like to graduate an additional 310,000 students every year, college and career ready? Well, when you start to look into those numbers, you realize that 80% of those students have to be from low-income families. 33% have to be African American, and 33% have to be Latino. 20% of those students have to be English language learners, and 40% of those students have to have disabilities. So this is where the challenge lies, that the student population that we need to be able to serve is far more, has a different set of needs than what our system is set up to attend to. But the good news is that we have a lot of hope. We're at a moment in time in education reform that we haven't been in 3 generations. So we're ready to make the kind of change. We have the momentum, we have the excitement. You're hearing all sorts of words. We saw many people who are involved in education. I'm sure you're hearing words like competency-based, personalized, whole child, social and emotional learning. There is a cacophony of language out there that is representing this wave of education reform. And coupled with that, the science is starting to catch up with us. So we understand more about the brain, we understand more about learning science than we ever have in the history of mankind. So we know a lot to be able to change the way that we approach education. And then the final thing is, we have the technology to do things really differently now, even more than 10 years ago. We understand Moore's effect. And we have the technology now to really have a highly personalized learning experience. So we have all of the right ingredients in place. The challenge is, if we don't understand this student population that we need to serve, that we could very well recreate the current paradigm and dilemma that we're in. And we could get to a point where personalized, relevant, contextualized, competency-based, and that entire cacophony of language exists, technically, but isn't actually serving any more students than we are today. So that's why we brought together this group of folks, because we realized that we actually can't go this alone. Each of us represents a piece in the collective puzzle that we need to bring together to solve this problem. So with that, we've brought together social entrepreneurs, like the folks to my left, funders, researchers, policy influencers, opinion leaders, parents, students, educators. And we're collectively working to say, how can we align our actions to drive forward as a movement to achieve the change that we need to?
Great.
So that's a little bit overview of what we do.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks. I'll pick up from there. And just to reinforce the point that Shruti was making around the challenge and the opportunity that we have in front of us as a country. On the challenge side, in my mind, it sort of comes down to 2 buckets. There's one, that we have a serious issue with equity, right? And we have to address it. 2 other stats that support what Shruti was saying. One, 10% of the high schools in our country produce 50% of the dropouts. all of those high schools are located in areas of concentrated generational poverty. And you're going to hear more about the link, the scientific link of that from my colleague Pam in a few minutes. And then two, when we talk about the achievement gap, we're usually looking at statistics that say low income versus middle and upper income students. And if you look at the graduation rate as a metric, we know that upper income students are approaching 90%. They're approaching that sort of gold standard that the economists have said if we have 90% of our students graduating high school, college, and career ready, we'll be able to supply the workforce of the future to remain competitive economically. When you look at low income, it drops 10 percentage points, so around 77 percentage points, or 13 percentage points to 77. When you then factor in areas of concentrated poverty, and the metric that the federal government uses is areas where 40% or more of the population are low income. And if you think about this from a common sense, when you think of the challenges, you're not only facing your own individual challenges coming from a low income background, but that's being impacted by all the people around you. And in that case, it drops another 10 percentage points. And so that's where you find these dropout factory high schools that are producing an outsized number of dropouts. That's frankly where the school to prison pipeline is strongest, right? So those are significant multi-generational challenges that are not easy to turn around. On the other hand, as we've been convening this group of over 100 very eclectic sort of leaders concerned around this issue, we've been excited by recognizing that there's unbelievable knowledge in the last 10 to 15 years about how the human brain works, how students develop, how we thrive. And we've synthesized that into sort of three pillars that we think are foundational to the future of education. The first is we have to put to bed the myth of an average learner, because the brain research shows that that's just not true. There's tremendous variability. Yet if you go back and you look at the underpinnings, the policy underpinnings of how we set up K-12 education, it's anchored in the idea that there's an average learner, and that maybe there's 10 or 15% of the kids that might need a little extra support, and maybe 10% that are able to sort of go ahead, but it was anchored, everything, the staffing patterns, the resources, the curriculum, everything is designed towards something that we now know doesn't exist. The answer to that is what Shruti was referring to, is the idea of more personalized learning. Technology can be a powerful accelerator, yet we haven't quite figured out how to maximize that. But we believe that a more personalized learning experience is essential to helping all students meet their potential. The second is the idea that you cannot separate cognitive and social-emotional development, that they're actually integrated, and that you have to design schools and educational experiences for students that recognize if we're going to build students' internal engines. And if you think of a lot of the amazing speakers we had earlier this morning talking about the future, and you think of what kind of learner do we need to be building for the future, it's one that knows how to learn. It's not just the knowledge that you take with you out of high school or college, and that's supposed to keep you prepared for life. You actually have to be able to adapt. Our access to knowledge is infinite, but students have to know how to be expert learners. And that really is at the connection of sort of cognitive and social emotional development to build that internal engine. And then the final pillar is this idea of student agency, that students really need to drive their own learning, and that we need to create experiences, programmatic, deliberate experiences in education that create that sense of relevance and meaning in school and empower students to drive their own education. Having said all of that, before we get too excited and think that we're going to take this new learning about how the brain works and apply these fundamentals, we have to really wrestle with what are the impacts, what does science tell us about the impacts of concentrated generational poverty and essentially adversity. How do people develop or not develop in situations of adversity? And I'm going to turn it over to our expert Pam to share there.
So fortunately, whatever I say that you might regard as bad news, the flip side of it is good news, and here's why. How many of you have heard that the American public education system is falling behind countries all over the world? Okay. The reason you've heard that is because there is an international test of performance called PISA. And the PISA test is a test given to 15-year-olds across the globe. In our country today, in communities with less than 10% poverty, our scores are as high as Finland, Korea, China, Singapore. No difference. But that's not what you hear about in the news. The minute the poverty rate climbs to 50% or more, the scores plummet. And the scores in our country fall to the bottom of the pack. So many of us have known for a long time that adversity and poverty matter. We just didn't know how. So one of the things that a lot of us have been able to unpack scientifically tells us that adversity doesn't just happen to children. It happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. So when children experience stress, their HPA system fires, and their brains and bodies are bathed in cortisol. And cortisol goes to two primary systems in children. It goes to their limbic system, which is the learning center of the brain, attention, concentration, memory, behavioral control, and it goes to their immune system, which means that children under stress are actually at much higher risk for health issues. So one of the things we actually have quantified is something called the ACE, the Adverse Childhood Experience, and that when children have greater than 4 ACEs, and an ACE would be something like witnessing the violent death of a loved one. When children have greater than 4, they are 60% times more likely to have learning and behavioral problems in school. And today in our country, 51% of children are growing up in poverty, the highest number since poverty rates for children have been recorded. So you could listen to this and you could say, what are we going to do about this? But the other side of this coin that I promised you is that when I went to med school, I was told that the brain develops and you're done by the time you're 5. Fortunately for all of us in this room, that is not true. That our brains continue to develop into adulthood. Yes, there are critical periods, and 0 to 5 is definitely one of them. But our brains continue to develop throughout our young adult lives and older adult lives. So this has profound meaning for our education system. Because if relationships and environments shape the developing brain, that means that we can design environments to shape the developing brain. But how? So folks in my organization ask that question, meaning how do kids acquire the skills and beliefs to be ready and engaged learners? We read lots of things and produced a synthesis of that research, and you have, many of you on your tables, this framework, the Building Blocks for Learning framework, which is a developmental framework that says that just like you learn literacy, just like you learn math, that there's a formative path by which children acquire these very, very critical skills. So what are the implications of this? If we know which skills have been affected by the experience of adversity, we could promote those skills as a regular part of our K-12 education system, not as an add-on program. Okay, cognitive readiness should be a part of education, folded into the content, folded into the academic side of education. So I want to leave you with the idea that where science is today is that the science of adversity and the science of potential are one and the same science. And we can use that to do something that's never been done in K-12 education before.
Awesome.
And the science is fascinating. It gives me hope, and I think it gives all of us hope that we can actually contribute positively to our kids, but also contribute positively to all of the kids in the country. I'm a new granddad, and so my granddaughter Charlotte is going to experience the world of education so much differently than we did. And I think that's what New Prophet's kind of really fascinating, because they get all parts of the life cycle going. And so when she, is up in the morning, her grandparents, me, will know that speaking to her is really important. Getting 30,000 words across is really important. Manipulating, talking to her is critical. I'll even do it on FaceTime. And then when she goes to preschool, she'll have better teachers, because the teachers will understand her better and her brain better, and her compatriots, her friends are going to learn differently, and that's okay. And so all of a sudden we're going to have teachers that are taught to differentiate between learning styles and have teachers who are going to understand their different learning styles. Then we're going to have kids, as Pam said, who are taught to train their brains, who are taught to be quiet and center themselves, who are taught to be present, who are taught to look at the other person as a human being and work well with them. Executive function skills. Those aren't taught enough. And we have the science now that can support us being able to understand how to teach them. We have understanding how to work with kids who have learning disabilities and learning issues. My younger son has a learning issue related to processing. He's great in math, but he's really horrible in verbal. Instead of schools in the old days saying, well, that's tough, now we've got specialists and systems and technology that can help him. And the same thing in higher ed. At UVA, we're starting to see the new 10 years ahead for all higher education, all universities. You're going to have not 4 years of residency. You're going to have a year of field. You're going to have a gap year coming in. So it's all up in the air. And so how can we set up collaborations that start getting people to do things that they couldn't do by themselves? One organization just can't do it by itself any longer. KIPP Schools we backed, but it has 178 schools. You know how many schools there are in America? 100,000. You just can't get there by scaling 1 or 2 or 3 great ideas. You take the great ideas and embed them in a partnership and a collaboration. I was lucky enough to work over the last 9 years in global health, and we worked on malaria. And malaria we started with 9 years ago, 1 million deaths a year. We're down below 100,000 this year. It's because of a collaboration, not because we backed just one organization. It's because all of us came together, and whether it was Peace Corps, Save the Children, Carolyn Miles is here somewhere, or whether it's USAID, multilaterals, for-profits. Exxon was our biggest funder in malaria, who knew? Awareness building and American Idol, and it's because it was a partnership that we all got together to focus on one core issue. And important in these collaborations, this is what I study actually, one of the things at the Kennedy School at Harvard is, how do you collaborate? And this is what New Profit's all of a sudden leading the edge on. They had policy change people working on, how do we change policy for the last 10 years? No organization by itself can do that. You need policy change, you need to communicate, you need to innovate, you need to do research, you need to figure out scaling, but you need to have collaborative glue that holds it together. How many people here have gone to meetings saying, oh, we're going to make the world a better place, and then gone home, and nothing happens? Well, that's what we're starting to figure out is, how do you have the collaborative glue to hold these ideas together, to hold the partnerships together, and then measure whether they're being achieved or not? Who's actually collecting that data? And who can be that honest broker that says, I'm not here to raise money for me or my organization. I'm trying to achieve that higher goal, whether it's malaria or whether it's getting kids educated in an appropriate way in early childhood, and they're pulling together groups like Sesame Street, groups like Lego Foundation, groups like New Teacher Center, training and mentoring teachers. And so how do you start bringing these groups together? You start joining together. And this is what these guys are working on. And whether it's the science, or whether it's building an amazing enterprise like CityYear, which is one of the largest AmeriCorps funded programs in America, with 3,000 kids a year going through it, or Shruthi's sitting there going, I need to figure out, how do I get individuals to work together in the social emotional learning world, meditation world, but also the science of it all. Because these people don't normally talk to each other. So that's what, Vanessa, you've been leading, so thank you.
Yeah, well, it's exciting, and I hope we're conveying to you the excitement we feel on this new approach to change. And I'd love to have Jim and Pam talk a little bit more about how it really works. Like, you run big organizations. Every day you have a choice. Are you going to grow your organization, or are you going to focus on partnerships with other organizations? How do you maneuver those choices, and what are you guys doing on a day-to-day basis?
Let me start. Okay. So I don't consider myself and our organization big by comparison to my colleague here. Okay, so to give you a sense of scale, it's an organization of about 62 people. We operate in 3 districts, and we have about a $12 million budget. But what our organization is seeking to do is to deeply unpack the impact of adversity and stress on children's learning, and to show in real challenging schools, the most challenging schools, that you can change the culture and climate of those schools, and you can change the children in terms of their readiness for learning. But our aim as an organization is not to grow our footprint. Our aim is to go deeper and deeper in the application of the science, the data associated with that. And then, like a dream I have and have had for a long time, is to work with a social entrepreneur like Jim, because Jim's work is not only about schools, it's about attachment, it's about people who can serve the adult need for trust and the child need for trust. But Jim has a huge footprint. If our knowledge landed in his footprint, then you begin to get to some of the numbers that we have to get to as an education system.
And I think that really is, Pam's example is a great example of the power of this sort of collective approach, because the reality is in the schools and with the children we serve, there is a sense of urgency. There's very little time to lose, and everything needs to be optimized for their learning and to help them maximize their potential and to overcome obstacles. And I'm going to come back, put a pin in that and come back. I want to give a little bit, Vanessa, to your question about the sort of evolution of our organization and how our thinking has shaped
That'd be great.
over time. So City Year is 27 years old. I got involved 3 or 4 years after it started as doing a year of service. So the idea is you do a year of service to the country. And I worked in a Head Start program, and I was absolutely blown away by the experience and the big ideas that were being promoted. The idea that national service could help our country meet its democratic potential, that if it was an expected part of our culture that everyone did a year of service, where are you going to work, where are you going to go to college, where'd you do your service year? If we could get to that point, that would embed a sense of full civic participation, that being a citizen isn't only about having rights, it's actually about participating in our democracy, right? 2, that it was a team-based model that deliberately put you on a team with people from different socioeconomic, racial, and religious backgrounds to create a shared experience, something that we see in the military, we see it on sports teams, but just didn't exist in the civic square. And that type of shared experience equips you to learn about others and about yourself in a way that, as a citizen, you can participate in our democracy. And the third was that young people were an untapped resource, that positive change has happened throughout history led by young people. And if you think of the amazing and heroic and things that our military does, which is largely young adults, right? That the idea that if we channel and structure an opportunity for a service year, that just like the military is our national defense, that national service could be our national offense. So very big, powerful ideas. The idea there's sort of a double bottom line, that young adults would be transformed, would be more effective citizens, they'd learn leadership skills, and that during their year of service, they would actually help address pressing public problems. So I say all of that. I've been involved for over 2 decades. It's a big enough vision to work a lifetime on. You don't necessarily need to collaborate. You don't necessarily need to get into education to feel like you're really making a difference in the world if that's what you're working for. Fast forward 15 years into our organizational history, we did a longitudinal study on our alumni, and we asked the question, a very large study, against other young adults with a propensity to serve. And what that means, we weren't going out and only attracting kids that were going to be great citizens anyway, right? So this was a fair comparison. And we found that in sort of indicators of social capital, those of you who are familiar with Robert Putnam's work around Bowling Alone, his great novel around sort of voting, volunteering, joining civic organizations, being comfortable in diverse populations, sort of the glue of a democratic society. We know for a fact that experience makes more engaged, more effective citizens by a statistically significant amount. So check that box, right? Now we've got to get that adopted across the entire country, and we could only focus on that. But we were concerned that when you said, well, 15 years in, what problem have we helped solve? We know that it's great for the participants. We know that's great long-term for the country. But we're serving in urban communities. We care deeply about these communities where we live and serve and the children within them. Have we really moved the needle on that? And so that forced us then to start to examine what is our role? How could we get more focused? Because we were providing a wide range of community sort of projects at that time. Always in schools, but not exclusively in schools. Fast forward, it was very clear that if we were going to try to create a pathway from poverty to post-secondary success for kids in the communities where we lived and served, it had to be through education. And we also began to recognize that the schools that we were serving in were not equipped to this idea of the average learner and what happens if 75% or more of the kids, and they need something show up every day, and they need more than a great lesson. And for the educators in the room, we know that is an incredibly difficult thing to do, just to deliver a great lesson every day. And if 75% of the kids need something more than that, how do you close that sort of almost that relationship gap, or what some people call relationship poverty? And that's where we realized that by asking young adults doing a year of national service who are willing to donate their fair market value, serve long, hard hours, and we can put 10, 15, 20 of them in a school full time, that changes the ratio. So we could have stopped there and said, great, we've got a big vision for national service in the country, we've found our niche, right? Schools want us, we're growing. But then the question became, again, are we really going to have a big impact? Are we going to change graduation rates, or can we help build the graduation pipeline? And the answer came back screaming, that's all about partnership and collaboration. That there's a unique role we can play, and when you can understand that and then step back and say, how do you stitch that together with other high-performing nonprofits, with researchers, with science, you begin to see maybe some of these intractable problems that seem so difficult to solve really are only a generation away from being solved if we just think differently about it. So it's no small thing when someone as accomplished as Pam, and because of this network, we have a relationship, to think that in a very short period of time, our 3,000 plus core members working in the highest need schools with some of the most vulnerable kids in the country are going to have the benefit of cutting edge science about adversity and building those skills that they need to succeed.
So picking up on that theme, I want to say something else about the meaning of what New Profit does in the world. I was telling this story a little bit backstage. I found it really strange in going from the medical world to the education world that in medicine, if one of you came to me with hypertension and all I did was give you an antihypertensive drug, in medicine, that would be tantamount to malpractice. If I didn't know your history, the interactions that would happen with that drug, what else was going on in your life, the thing I'm saying is that it's a requirement to think across disciplines, to think across diverse needs within an individual. But everything about the way we've gone about solving our public education program is singular. Let's fix teachers. Let's provide services. And then, honestly, it's hard to run an organization like this, so it's not surprising that you can get into your own tunnel, and that's all you can do. Mm-hmm. But the thing that New Profit has done is they've seen beyond the horizon that we can see. They've seen and listened to scientists, deep, deep thinkers, and exposed people like Jim or me to that kind of thinking so that we are changed by it, so that our practice is not single bullet. Our practice is influenced by each other, and then the partnerships grow from there, which is we could have more impact if we used each other's knowledge and scope a different way. Most of education does not operate the way they operate, and it's a big problem. So this is something that has been a huge factor.
And your bias in your organizations,
yes,
the old boards are, let me fund myself.
Yeah.
Let me grow myself. We used to, as old venture capitalists, torture you guys saying, what's your scaling strategy? Well, it's not by yourself. And so Vanessa, I'm really curious, how do you hold these boards that want to do it all by themselves and philanthropists that sit there going, I'm looking for the silver bullet answer, but you got a collaboration.
It's really a mindset change that we have to create in philanthropy, because we sit on the boards of many of these organizations, and while they say, oh, it's so great you all are collaborating and you have these collective goals, they still go back and say, but what part did you create? Where's exactly the throughput? Like, my money went to what? And if we keep pushing organizations in that way, we're going to keep forcing these separate pools instead of the collective action. And so getting people around the table with the entrepreneurs, so it's sort of shoulder to shoulder, let's pick the problem. And in the case of Reimagine Learning, we want all kids to have differentiated learning in our schools. And that's what we want. and we're all aiming at that, and we're all measuring and using the same term sheet, but it's a term sheet of a collective. And that's a new concept in philanthropy, and there are not a lot of these kind of collectives happening. There are some, and it's an exciting
But
time.
you're engaging philanthropists. They're not
Yeah.
just
That's
investors
exactly it.
anymore.
No,
they're
they're-
actually using their networks, their knowledge.
Right.
How do you access that?
And some of how we're measuring success is we're measuring success by population level outcomes, but we're also measuring success by the number of partnerships being formed within the Reimagine Learning Network. We're measuring success by how the collaborative works effectively as a collaborative, and not just
What's
not
an
just the sum
example
of the
a
parts.
project?
So a great example, I think these guys are talking about an emerging partnership. Is that
That's
fair?
right. That is.
But you might talk about New Teacher Center
Yeah.
and some of the researchers and how that's partnered.
So New Teacher Center, they train 40,000 new teachers annually, en route to training 1/3 of all new teachers in this country. So pretty significant scale. Right now, impacting 2.5 million children in the U.S., all from across the country, but in districts with high concentrations of poverty. And New Teacher Center, one of the elements that has been part of their motto since the beginning is that you should, they always say, know your students. For the teacher mentors, they say, know your teachers, and for the teachers, they say, know your students. So it's, fundamentally and philosophically has always been an approach to individualized or personalized learning. The challenge they face is, how do you actually do that? How do you know your students well? So now we have New Teacher Center, and we've facilitated partnerships with a set of other organizations, including All Kinds of Minds, which is, has provided a framework for neural development across different dimensions. So every single New Teacher Center teacher, not right now, it's not every single one, but they're piloting it in a couple sites, but they're en route to getting every single New Teacher Center teacher trained in cognitive development across different dimensions so that they can start to have a shared framework and a shared language to be able to talk about the students in their classrooms and to be able to say, you know what, I think this is an area where spatial this person's great at spatial visualization, but is struggling with social cognition. And I think, therefore, we need to have some targeted approaches to these students who are struggling with social cognition in the classroom. They're also partnering with the University of Kansas Center for Research on Learning to implement a program that is across the entire New Teacher Center network to help students build their own possible futures for themselves. And it's based on research that understands that once students have aspirations tied to their education, they can start to work their way backwards and start to understand themselves as learners and figure out the pathway to get to their ultimate goal. Those are only 2 of New Teacher Center's partnerships. There's 3 or 4 more, but it gives you an example of how they're trying to impact those 40,000 teachers and 2.5 million students more effectively.
Which goes counter to the myth that Common Core is going to fix everything.
That's exactly
That
right.
unions are the problem. That teachers don't get it. The whole list, that charter schools are the answer. These are all myths. They're just the wrong answers, right?
Right,
But we
right.
all get stuck, right? And you need to
Everybody's
open
looking
that
for
one
a
up.
silver
I think
bullet. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the challenge is that we're never able to get a complete picture. What we're trying to do is reset the entire chessboard around how schools are organized, designed, and resourced for the next century, because they were built for an entirely different time, entirely different economy, entirely different set of consequences, and all of those things have get inflated in terms of that they're the answer. And the reason that the work that this collective is doing is so important is that it is very tough, and you can be isolated. I mean, the accountability metrics inside the K-12 school system are largely annual, right? You don't hear a lot of reports that says, how does this elementary school students do in terms of their college completion rate? I mean, that's not how people are, right? I mean, there's no coordinated effort about the long-term outcome or return to society in terms of productive contributing citizens coming from that system. And it's the same to the investment standpoint. I mean, I know this is true. We're part of a 3-organization collaborative that's working together across 12 school districts doing a large randomized control trial. We have some results that'll be coming out that I think are going to be positive. And to your point, Vanessa, we will absolutely have some investors in my organization that are going to say, it only matters to me to the extent you can tell me how much of this city year drove. And I don't understand that math. Because from an investment standpoint, if someone says, we have a partnership model in which 1 + 1 is 5,
Yeah, it's a pretty good
keep
deal.
investing in it. And,
Right.
and whether or not someone's 1.5 and someone's half, it doesn't really matter. But so I think we have to push the dialogue in our country to think about these collective and coordinated strategies, to Jeff's point, because otherwise everyone picks the issue of the day, or they'll say it's government, or one more point. We talk about the whole child. We cut kids into a million different slivers, right? We're like, well, let's just look at it from education. But we know that from a developmental standpoint, mental health, food, housing security, safety, you can't, except I could get rewarded as a social entrepreneur. I can go out and create a fairly good point solution and create an alliance with the K-12 education that works to their annual accountability system. And maybe we're not going to scale 10,000 times, but we'll scale and be sustainable. But we really won't be driving solutions in our community. So it is going to take a collective approach to reset that chessboard, because there are a lot of incentives to stick to the status quo.
And I want to be clear that what you're saying
See,
is
I don't
not
have to facilitate.
I want to be clear that what you're saying is not to get soft. We're not saying that we want to believe that a collective can do more. We're going to still as results driven as we ever have been.
More so.
Yeah.
More so, even more so, results driven.
There's a science to it.
There is a science to it. It is just that we're not trying to say that City Year has a 0.25 point impact on math and English language arts scores. That's 100% attributable to them, because we all know, and the educators in this room would say much more loudly than any of us can, that these students who are in your classroom are not in isolated experiments. We're not running experiments with no interaction with the rest of the community and the other organizations that they're going to be involved in throughout the course of their lives. So,
But Pam, I want to come out with hope. Kids that walk in that are damaged, stress, 4 levels higher than the average, these are all fixable.
Yes. But I wanted
And how do we do that?
Okay. I wanted to go back to a point that you made a minute ago about that it's not all about the Common Core. But the value of the Common Core has been the fact that our bar was too low in this country. And so the value of having standards and setting the bar where the bar ought to be was an incredibly valuable thing to do. Unfortunately, it also put a spotlight across the country about how uneven our kids' academic competencies actually were. But one of the things that should have gone along with the Common Core, and is very much the point I'm making with you, is that the whole area of skills that I would call co-academic skills, skills like agency, perseverance, creativity, all of those kinds of skills, like when you think of the skills that ultimately make a young person successful in their lives, it wasn't their math score, okay? It was a whole other set of skills that went along with that produced their academic performance, but it also set them up for a job and for other things and other challenges in their lives. The notion that we know what that human development pathway is, and we can actually intentionally build those skills. So I'll give you one concrete example. We'll pick one called growth mindset. Growth mindset is a tool, it's a skill that says, I believe that my intelligence is not fixed, and I believe I can grow my intelligence with effort. Okay, that's in contrast to, I believe I'm dumb, and that nothing I do matters. Well, very often, kids who have grown up with a great deal of adversity, in fact, have a fixed mindset. And there are literally tools that all teachers can learn. They are so easy. And you work with children at a moment, usually of failure, where they're struggling. And exactly at that moment, if adult comes in and shows them how to redo that math problem, creates the pathway for them to have a success, you know what's going to happen? They will do more math problems. They will see themselves as somebody who can be successful in an academic environment. Growth mindset can be taught. by any teacher, and it's extremely easy to do. So how hard would it be for us to imagine having a world where any person who touches the life of a child, a mentor, a teacher, a parent, to reinforce the idea of a growth mindset just as one of a number of skills that are pro-development?
While we're on the subject of sort of the future,
Yep.
we have like 10 more minutes, and I'd love to just hear, what does a school look like once this collective is successful? What are we going to see in our schools 10, 20, 50 years from now?
Okay. You want me to start, or you want to?
Sure.
Yeah, you can go first.
Okay.
You're the scientist.
Okay. I want to see a school where a child walks in the door looking forward to a day where they are going to be doing things that they're excited by, motivated by, and are going to succeed in. And I want them to walk into the door of a place where the adults know them, and no matter what has gone on in the rest of their life, what's communicated to them in this school is belief that they can do the work, have a future, own a piece of life that nothing in their life told them that they could. And everything that happens to them in the school has to reinforce that message.
And I think in that school, you would see that students have personalized plans, but that the school is organized around a set of competencies and mastery and project-based learning that is both ensuring that they have the cognitive development and the social-emotional skills to succeed in the world of the future.
I think that school would not have walls in a traditional sense. You'd see health organizations, community-based organizations. You'd see all of the community coming together, maybe in one location. But each student is able to see and get the impact of lots of different services that they're surrounded with on a daily basis.
You know, the future is here, it just hasn't been scaled yet. And so you can look out there, and I think you're experimenting with all of those, but you know, children will walk in their classroom and they'll be matched to a teacher who has the teaching style that matches their learning style. They'll be evaluated on almost a daily basis saying, gee, they didn't learn this point well enough in math. We need to move them in two others that are in the same kind of path over here so we can focus and concentrate on them learning that so they're not lost. So we're not teaching a classroom of 30, we're teaching groups and pods of individuals and kids that can be moved around. They'll be experiential for sure, they'll be teaming. What can you group of 3 and 4 students solve yourselves in learning how to interact with others? There'll be those that look at the world and say, what am I going to do to be involved with the world? And how can I work with my parents? How can I work with my community? And so these are absolutely outside and inside worlds. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on, and we haven't even started talking about the teachers and starting to talk about the schools themselves and how you're going to walk in and feel a difference.
Right. And there's also all the technology. So at home, they might get their lesson at home at night, and the teacher might be mentoring them in the classroom
So the
using.
classroom is here, and this is what's going to be happening. Is that absolutely, you're going to start learning here, and then coming to school to actually interact.
Yeah. I guess the last question to leave for all of you to think about is, do we do this locally? Like, the answers are out there. We have pockets of the answers of the future of education, but we have to knit them together. And do we start with trying to knit them together at the national level? Do we start, here in Florida in this community? How do we get the activity and the transformation to happen? And at what level do we start?
All of the above.
Yeah. Typical social entrepreneur answer is both and, right?
I mean, we've got to have.
I mean, how do you guys think about it? Like, you're in 3 communities. You're in how many? 27 or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is true. I mean, you've got to have both program and practice. You've got to have sort of bottoms-up, grassroots sort of momentum for this, including involving students and having agency and all this. And then you've got to have a national and a statewide strategy. I mean, the new federal education law is pushing a lot to the states. So a lot of this has to do with sort of mobilizing at the state level. But then there's also cultural aspects of this. I mean, fundamentally, the conversation we need to be having as a country is, what is an expanded definition of a successful student? If we can get that conversation going and then drive that through policy at the federal, state, and local level and across sectors, that could accelerate, scaling the schools of the future. And I don't know what could be more important.
The new education law does.
Say a word about, we all as a collective worked on the new education law, 14 years, there hasn't been a reauthorization, and now there is one, and it has...
Do they even know there has been one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if people know that, but No Child Left Behind is what we always knew to be education law. It has changed in the last 6 months, and we were part of crafting it, and it represents exactly what we want, which is good. The context has changed, and maybe, Pam, you could say a word about federally how the context has changed.
The main thing that we want from policy is for policy not to be a barrier, and we want policy to do no harm. So that doesn't always happen, because sometimes there are unintended consequences to policy. So the hope is, and this is one of the other very major accomplishments of New Profit, because they have really built a very large policy effort, which none of us as social entrepreneurs can do, but at the same time, they perpetually harvest our best thinking and bring it into their policy and advocacy effort. So the new ESSA law has a couple of things that are really important. One, they are asking states what are their plans for their most vulnerable children and their most struggling schools. And they are focused on environment, which, if you remember, the science, environment, and relationship shape the developing brain. That's big. So there is an opportunity to define what we mean by an environment that shapes the developing brain. And then states have to pick a co-academic metric. In other words, you have to pick a metric like self-regulation, executive function, growth mindset. They're going to have to pick some of those metrics that they are going to be accountable to, and that means that Title I and Title II dollars can be applied to skills to develop those particular student skills and mindsets. So those two things are tremendously important, and I think there's a third one about learner differentiation that's important too.
Authorization for competency-based pilots, so where you can have schools that are still following the same kind of unrelenting, high expectations for all students, but are appreciating that students need to go through competency-based pathways to get to to meet those expectations. So appreciating that the pacing may be different slightly student to student, as long as you ultimately get there in a certain time period.
It's that umbrella of change that the law can help us look at, but nobody likes to be told what to do from top down. And so how do you get local ownership and local involvement where they can pick the tools that they can need and use in their own groups? I work on a project in Louisville, Kentucky, where we have 2,000 students in random control trial over a 4-year period, proving Pam's theories, proving that you can actually bring and build foundation of learning, of understanding others, of being present. And the mayor has bought off on it. The chancellor of schools has bought off on it. And so if the results are positive, they're going to take it from 2,000 kids to 45,000 kids. And so the city itself is committed to it, and their local community foundations bought off on it. The local funders are bought off on it. And so they're saying, what do we want for our own city? We want to be the most compassionate city. I don't know what Naples wants to be, but maybe you ought to get together and find that out, have support around that, and we can help you get access to that umbrella of knowledge and the tools that are out there, but you have to figure out that mix that you want yourself, and we can be helpful in the shared knowledge model, but we're certainly not going to tell you what the answer is.
Yeah, and our biggest challenge is finding places to land these big ideas. So maybe there are ways we can come out of this conference collaborating with all of you. And no matter what, we do want to leave you with, you all are brain builders. So hopefully you leave this at least thinking, what am I going to do with my children, my grandchildren, to do that brain building every day that needs to be done? So thank you all for sharing. Thank you to our great panel. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.